Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. We have got an incredible guest lined up for you today. We're going to be doing some rookie previews with none other but Anthony Corrente. He is from the Dynasty Drive. He is part of the Rookie Big Board. Anthony, how are you doing?
Great, Rich. I appreciate you having me. It's always a pleasure to catch up and talk ball with you.
No, it's one of my favorite guests to get on every year. The best voice in the industry and a fantastic brain to go with it. We're going to be looking at 5 different prospects today. The idea is this is a preview, an introduction. We're not going to go into anything too deep, but just to give you a little bit of flavor about some of the guys that you should be drafting come May. So Anthony, we got to start with the big man himself.
Have to.
Everybody's talking about him. It feels like we've been talking about him for about 3 years since he was drafted. Of course, I'm talking about Bijan Robinson out of Texas. He's maybe the most hyped rookie I've certainly ever known. So he's a junior coming out of Texas. He's a 5-star recruit, 6 foot, 220 pounds. Let's be honest, he can do everything. What's not to love?
Yeah, I think the nice thing is that we haven't gotten to the point with Bijan like we do with a lot of other rookies every year where we're bored of talking about them. I'm glad we haven't reached the point with Bijan where we're overthinking Bijan. He's special, right? Like I've started to see just like a smattering of people be like, oh, is Bijan really better than Breece Hall was a year ago? Or is he really better than... The answer is yes. He's the best running back prospect since at least Saquon, probably. And I think what really makes Bijan Robinson special is he's a really unique blend of size, speed, and like legitimate receiving chops. Not like a big back who can be an outlet receiver, but he's somebody that you can legitimately split out wide, line up in the slot, create receiving touches for, and utilize in a variety of ways. He should be on the field all 3 downs like immediately in his rookie season. And I don't know. We do this thing every year where the NFL draft comes around and we start to overthink that, a running back won't go high, or will Bijan go round 1? He's going round 1. I'd be shocked if Bijan Robinson didn't go in the top half of the first round of the NFL draft. Whoever takes him will surely be slotting him into a workhorse role right away. He's a stud.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult, isn't it? As you said, we get into these situations where these players get hyped and it's almost to a point where all they can do is disappoint. Yeah. And I think that with Bijan, it's like he does everything. He does everything well. He's so far yet to disappoint. And it's like, I'm one to get excited about these rookies and kind of get them up high in my dynasty rankings early. But Bijan's the dynasty running back 1 before he's even stepped on the football field. And it feels slightly ridiculous to have him there. But he can do everything. He is fantastic running the ball. I think he can basically fit any offensive scheme in terms of whether it's an inside zone, outside zone, whether it's an old school power running scheme. As you said, he's fantastic either catching balls out the backfield. He can split out wide. I don't see a flaw in his game.
No.
I just am so excited.
I know. It's like, you hate to make it sound like anybody's ever can't miss, but man, he feels as close as it gets, right? Like it'd be a shock to everybody if Bijan didn't hit the way we expect him to. Because I agree, even if you're somebody that typically likes to slow play it a little bit with where you slot rookies in dynasty rankings, like how at worst do you put him, outside the top 2 or the top 3? He's just a special kind of player, a special kind of prospect. And I mean, he showed it out the past, 2 years at Texas, right? Broke out early as a freshman for 700 yards and then over 1,100 in his sophomore year and then almost 1,600 in his junior year. So he lived up to the hype every bit of the way for the Longhorns, and I'm expecting the same thing once he makes it to the NFL.
Yeah, and it's not like he's a prospect that's done it. I know Texas are a very good college, but it's not like he's done it at Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I know that he's an elite prospect, and Texas are a much better team than perhaps they've been over the past kind of 5-6 years. But this isn't like he's doing this behind 5 first-round offensive linemen as well. This is, there are some holes on that offense. This isn't the greatest show on turf that we've ever seen. And he has produced despite what is around him as such.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's a great point because despite it not being the best line at times, and despite being, like a bigger guy, he's super quick and like very crafty with the footwork through the hole and, getting through the line of scrimmage and kind of navigating traffic. Like he's really, I know it just sounds like we're gushing about the guy, but like you said at the beginning, like there's not a lot of holes to poke in his game. It's easy to fall in love with all of it. So I really expect him to show out early and often, and it would be a shock if he didn't, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. You can't expect anything less than RB1 numbers, right? And in contention for the RB1 as soon as he hits the field. Like,
yeah, I think, it sounds ridiculous to say it, but I think he's probably going to be a first round pick in redraft, which, and I appreciate we're sitting here and it's not the greatest fantasy content to be said, this guy's amazing, let's draft him. But it's so true. Do you have any knocks or concerns about him potentially coming out?
I really don't. I feel like he's as close to like a blue chip can't miss running back as you can get. He's a special talent. This is the guy, right? When for the last 2 years, when people were saying,
there you go. There you got
trade
it.
for 2023
in your
picks.
drafts.
Yeah.
No matter the format.
Take him. If you get him, be happy you got him.
So we're gonna move on to our next guy. We're gonna switch things up and go look at the running back position. Seems to be that he's becoming the consensus running back 2 in this class. I don't know if you'd agree, Anthony, but
yeah,
we can say a lot about him. I think there's some knocks, but I think the ceiling, if you're talking pure ceiling, this guy's ceiling is absolutely massive. Of course, I'm talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, who's started his career at Georgia Tech, transferred to Alabama. He's 5'11", 200 pounds. I think the biggest thing for me is that this isn't potentially a true workhorse in the way that Bijan Robinson is, but I think his receiving potential is better than pretty much any other running back in this class. What do you make of him?
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because I mean, Bijan is kind of in a tier all by himself, right? But Gibbs is running back 2 for me. And it's funny because I think in any year where Bijan Robinson's not involved in the same draft cycle, Gibbs probably gets a lot of hype as RB1, right? I think that's the kind of talent that he is, especially like you said, from a receiving standpoint and what he can kind of do as a receiver. He's special in that regard. It's not the same sort of deal where we talked about how Bijan was special as a receiver. Gibbs doesn't have that same kind of quite as sturdy build as Bijan does. So you're going to probably be a little more creative with him and probably not look to pound him inside as much as you can or will with Bijan Robinson. But he's a smooth runner. He flashes elite long speed. Like I said, different body type than Bijan, but a really, really good receiver. We saw it from his freshman year at Georgia Tech. He had 300 yards receiving as a freshman and then just did the same thing over and over. 465 as a sophomore at Georgia Tech and then 444 yards this past season with the Crimson Tide and his best rushing season with 926 yards. It feels lazy and we're probably all bored of it already. It's really hard to not comp Jahmyr Gibbs to Alvin Kamara. Like it's really hard not to. But I think that from a usage standpoint, right? And like what the receiving upside that he has and the receiving ability that he has, and we could say, oh, well, maybe he'll never get 200 carries in a season or this, that, and the other thing. I mean, for the first 4 years of Alvin Kamara's career, he didn't have more than 194 carries, right? So I think it's something where you can hand Jahmyr Gibbs the ball 160 times, 150 times, 170 times, whatever the case may be. And if he's still getting, I think we can, hopefully he lands with an offense where we can project him to get, 70, 80 targets. I think a team would be smart to feature him as a receiver right off the bat. And if that's the case, pencil in the fantasy, relevance right off the bat. Doesn't matter if he's only getting 150 or 160 carries. We know how valuable the targets and receptions are. But yeah, I do think too that for like the slighter build that he has, he makes up for like what he lacks in weight and build with pretty good patience and really good vision and instincts and short area quickness and kind of being able to avoid taking the massive hit. He's slippery in that way where he sort of glides and protects himself. So I really like Gibbs. Him and Bijan are kind of a clear cut above the rest of this running back class for me, where I view Bijan, as RB1 all by himself. And then, a slight drop to Gibbs before it drops off to another tier where there's a couple guys who are more closely grouped together. But I think on receiving upside alone, he has the potential to be a really special kind of talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit everything that I'd want to touch on. I think for me, it's three big things that I've kind of my three key buzzwords with him, and it's smooth, it's the receiving versatility, and it's a surprising thing for his build in that he always falls forward.
Yeah,
and I think that it's the thing that Alvin Kamara has is that he's not the biggest, but I think because of his lateral ability, he gets defenders off balance so that he doesn't take, as you were saying, those big hits because they don't have that solid base from which to tackle from.
right.
And he gets defenders off balance, which means that when he's at that contact point, if he doesn't break the tackle, he's at least falling forwards. And it's amazing. You sit and watch him, the amount of times where he'll have an extra kind of 2-3 yards on the end of a run just because he falls forward because that defender is off balance. And that's a massive thing at the NFL level.
Yeah.
And I think that, he's the kind of player that, yes, he's not going to get 20 carries between the tackles and be a workhorse. But, Austin Eckler was fantasy RB1 this season, was up there again in points per game last season as a guy that doesn't get that. He's a guy that if he can get 10, 15 carries, 7, 8 targets a game, maybe a couple of, he could potentially get interesting usage in terms of jet sweeps and things like that. You can get him to kind of 15 to 25 carries per game without having to just pound him down the middle. And he can put up, 15, 20 fantasy points without even breaking sweat because he's getting 6, 7, 8 targets a game.
Yeah, totally agree. I think he's a little more, we can almost plug Bijan in anywhere and it's like, okay, he's going to be good. Gibbs is a little more like, I'm interested to see where he lands because I hope it's with a smart staff that, utilizes him the right way, but still pretty easily the RB2 for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to dive across to look at some people's RB3, some people's maybe a little bit lower. So that's Zach Evans, who's the running back out of Ole Miss. He's someone that I really struggle, if I'm being honest, to fall in love with. I think that a lot of people have hyped him up. This is a 5-star recruit out of high school, obviously via TCU, had those 2 years, then ended up at Ole Miss. He's 5'11", 195 pounds. He does a lot well. For me, I just feel like I just want more. Every time I watch him, I just want, like, he's good, but I just don't see great. Are you a Zach Evans guy?
I am a Zach Evans guy. He is RB3 for me. Pretty comfortably RB3, I would say. I don't know that there's a lot that's going to sway that. And he's an interesting guy to say the least, right? Because for anybody who doesn't know, it's like one of the crazier stories of recruiting and how it all went down. Like at one point he was the #1 recruit. And then there was the whole weird thing where he was supposed to end up at Georgia and then got released from his letter of intent there. And he ended up catching on with TCU like shortly before his freshman year started. So it was a weird kind of unheard of recruiting path, especially for his caliber of recruit. Popped a little bit as a freshman. He did average over 7.5 yards a carry, but didn't get a whole lot of work. He only had 54 attempts. We saw a little bit more his sophomore year. Still averaged 7 yards per carry, but only got 92 attempts. I really think this past year, the transfer to Ole Miss got people excited. And I think it would have been the year where we were like, okay, here's the big numbers, except Quinshon Judkins exists, right? And he like absolutely blew the doors off everything as a true freshman. And, Evans had a good year, 144 carries, 936 yards, 9 touchdowns. But Judkins absolutely stole the show there. So I think if it wasn't that sort of situation, and if we saw him, land in a spot or maybe enjoy less of a timeshare there. Not saying they were wrong for featuring Judkins. He was electric, but the numbers probably aren't as good as we would have hoped for them to be since he ended up back in another sort of timeshare scenario. I do think he, like you said, he does a lot well, maybe lacks some of that, like we said with Bijan and we said with Jahmyr Gibbs, like this is what they're really special at. I think what Zach Evans is really special at is he can get north-south and is a good, powerful, explosive runner. He's got really, I think, natural instincts for the position. Like when you watch him play, I can see why. Okay, I could see why this guy was a high caliber running back recruit. He looks like he is a decisive north-south kind of one-cut runner. I think he can even add a little bit more weight to his frame without sacrificing a lot of explosiveness or anything like that. But I think he's a pretty smooth runner. He pairs a pretty ideal frame with really excellent contact balance. He's got a knack for working through contact. He's got good vision to help make the most of rushing lanes. The one big hole is we really haven't seen anything as a receiver, right? I mean, his best in college was this past year, and it was 12 catches. So, I mean, he's got 30 catches across his total college career. That was Gibbs's freshman season, right? Like, so that's the difference is we haven't really seen him pop as a receiver the way we have some of these other guys. But I do think I feel pretty confident that an NFL team is going to take him on day 2. And that is going to, like, if he falls out of day 2 and goes to day 3, that's going to be a big blow to his value. But as of right now, he's RB3 for me.
I think from a fantasy perspective, I'm really concerned about the receiving potential. And we've got some highlights playing here on the clip. Maybe this is me being a little bit mean, but I just like this is about as basic as you can get. And he drops the ball. Like that is a very simple running back screen that he can't bring the ball in. I think he's not a natural catcher. I think he's a poor route runner. I think he basically can only really be used almost in a Derrick Henry-like sense where, we'll get in some touches in the passing game, but it's going to be very basic screens and dump offs, and we can't expect anything slightly complex from him. I've got him in my kind of third tier, but that is quite a big drop from my second tier in terms of those top 2. And I feel like there's going to be somebody in pretty much every draft I do that likes him more than I do.
That's fair. I mean, I feel like there's players like that. Sometimes that's just the way it goes, right? And you end up with zero exposure to somebody because somebody's always willing to pay a higher price. And it's how I ended up with limited James Cook last year. Like that was the guy for me last year where I couldn't draft him because somebody was always willing to draft him earlier than I was.
Yeah, Damian Pierce was that guy for me. I liked the player, didn't love the player. At cost, I'd have absolutely drafted him. But the problem was that I never, in every league, I felt like he was overdrafted because he was going in the mid to back end of the first round, quite frankly, rather than going where I would have felt comfortable as such.
He definitely has to improve as a receiver, and he's really got to get better in pass protection too, which I think in pass pro, like he can get coached up there. He's got the body type for it, but hopefully he can land somewhere where they can really coach him up as a receiver, because right now I agree. I think the best you're getting out of him is really basic stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to dive across now and have a look at Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He was a player that last year as a sophomore broke out in a massive way, putting up huge numbers despite being potentially the wide receiver 3 in an offense with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. He's had a hit and miss season, but still an elite prospect. He's coming out of Ohio State, 5-star recruit, 6 foot, 200 pounds, primarily played out the slot, and that seems to be the biggest knock on him moving into this NFL draft process. Anthony, where are you on Smith-Njigba?
JSN is still wide receiver 1 for me. I feel like we went through that little bit of time, like shortly after the end of college season when the college football playoff was rolling on, where people started to kind of poke some holes in JSN because, of course, we didn't see a whole lot of them this year. He had that nagging kind of hamstring injury, and I think it gets easier when you're not like week in, week out watching a guy being like, oh yeah, this is a special sort of talent. But like you said, this is a guy that as a sophomore put up 1,609 touchdowns, and that was with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson on the field. So I think the upside is through the roof with Jaxon Smith-Njigba. like you said, did a majority of the work from the slot, and that's what a lot of people will point to. But I think every year we see, smart teams move their best players around, and we see, we did the same thing with Justin Jefferson the year he was coming out, right? It was just Justin Jefferson did so much of his damage from the slot. And I think it's a fair point to bring up, but I don't think it's the be all end all for Jaxon Smith-Njigba's game. I think he can win from the outside, and I think a smart team will let him play a ton of snaps from the slot as well. I think he's elite at creating separation. He's got great hands. He's a very good route runner. The upside that we saw in his sophomore year was absolutely bananas, and I think it would have been the same thing in his junior season had he not dealt with the injury and kind of lingered around all year. And of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. broke out in a big way for Ohio State. But JSN, for what the upside is, he's kind of that blend of the upside is super high, but I do think he's got a relatively safe floor. Like I don't see a lot of scenarios that play out where he makes it to the NFL level and he's just not a good player. So I think the worst case scenario with him is, maybe he's never going to be somebody that's on the level of Ja'Marr Chase or Justin Jefferson, but I think he's a really good wide receiver who I'd still be shocked if he wasn't a first round pick in the NFL draft. I know there was like kind of that, like some momentum building at one point, like he might fall out of day one on the NFL draft. I don't see it. I just, there's not enough other consistent players at wide receiver in this draft class that should go that much further ahead of him. He's an easy round one pick in rookie drafts. I'd be comfortable taking him anywhere from, the 104 or 105 on, depending on, format and all that good stuff. But I think he's pretty close to an elite talent. And I think it's, for the wide receiver class as a whole this year, we got a little, spoiled with these past couple of years where Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Drake London, and then, Chase and Jefferson, and there was just hit after hit, Jalen Watt, all these guys keep coming out. So then this year it's like, oh, well, there's not a player on the level of Ja'Marr Chase or Justin Jefferson. Well, that's true with most years, right? Like, I don't think that's not like a safe barometer to keep. So yeah, JSN for me, I think can really do the same kind of damage we saw at Ohio State at the next level. And I get the concerns of maybe lacking top end speed or doing most of his damage from the slot. But there was a time when we did the same thing with Garrett Wilson too. Like I remember before Garrett Wilson ran at the combine and people said, well, Garrett Wilson's not that fast. And then he ran sub 4.4. So I'll be interested to see what he runs. But I think even if JSN runs high 4.4s, low 4.5s, it's not the end of the world for me. I know some people will overreact to it, but just from a route running technician standpoint and what we've already seen him do, I'm pretty comfortable with locking him in as wide receiver one.
Yeah, absolutely. I love a good route runner when it comes to wide receivers. And to me, I think
Same.
he's a natural separator. And I think that, there's concerns that, yes, he did play primarily out of the slot. But I don't think that's a cap on him. I think he has the ability to play outside. I think he's got a good release package. I don't think he's one of these guys that, he only lined up in the slot because he couldn't beat press man coverage. And I think that he's able to do that. I think that he will, worst case scenario, he's an above average slot receiver in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Jerry Jeudy, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Cooper Kupp all saw over 50% of their targets from the slot last year. But let's not pretend like slot receivers are this terrible fantasy asset that we don't want any part of. I think he could be an X at the next level, but I don't think he has to be an X to be fantasy relevant. And I think that if that's the one knock on him is that he got injured a little bit this year and he's not a true outside receiver, then, I'm happy to take the discount in drafts because I think he is an elite route runner. I think he's a good athlete. I don't see, 4.2, 4.3 speed, but I don't think we need that to succeed in the NFL. I go back to the video. I get that it's players talking about themselves, but Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN all sat around at the training and they go, who's the best athlete? These are three
pointed at
guys.
him. Yeah.
And they all point to JSN. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are good enough athletes that they have broken out in a massive way in their rookie years. And they both said that this guy's a better athlete than they are.
Yeah.
I'm in. I think, easily top 5 in Superflex. I'd potentially be happy with him at 103. I've got him in the same tier as Stroud and Gibbs. And I think that all 3 of them are interchangeable at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I love the one thing you said, because I think it's kind of this sort of antiquated, like old trope of like, oh, he's a slot receiver. And you made the point of all those guys who played more than half their slot or half their snaps from the slot. Because I agree. I think JSN could play from the slot. I think he could play X. I think what it is that I don't think he played primarily from the slot because he had to play primarily from the slot. I think he played primarily from the slot because they had the luxury of 3 elite wide receiver talents on the field at the same time. And I really think, had he stayed healthy this year, that we could have seen a lot more of him on the outside with Emeka Egbuka bumping inside and Smith-Njigba and Marvin Harrison Jr. both on the outside at times. So, but yeah, it's, good teams will move him around. Smart teams will move him around just the way some of those other offenses are smart enough to move their playmakers down into the slot and get favorable matchups as well.
Yeah, exactly that. We're going to move to a guy that I'm less excited about the most. I'm fascinated to hear your take, because I feel like over the last few years, I feel like our wide receiver takes have been quite similar.
Yeah.
So I'm really intrigued to see if that continues and whether you dislike this guy like I do. So we're going to talk about Quentin Johnston. He's, I'll be honest, getting hyped to a point where I can't quite believe what I'm seeing. He's been talked about as wide receiver 1 in this class. So he's a 4-star recruit coming out of TCU, 6'4", 193 pounds, big bodied, being called a contested catch weapon, being called, all sorts. I can't get on board. Talk to me. Where are you at with Quentin Johnston?
I feel like how I approach Quentin Johnston, it's really been a roller coaster. Like, I was in early on, like in Devy leagues, I saw the potential. I held firm on that. Even coming into this college season, I was like, this is a guy that could really, like before the season went kind of awry for Kayshon Boutte, I was like, this is a guy that could push Kayshon Boutte, kind of be in that top tier wide receiver. Right now, I'm really cooling on him a little bit. I still like the potential that he offers, but it's a lot of projection, right? And it's a lot of inconsistency. I do think he's going to get drafted early because I think the NFL falls in love with his size profile, right? I think that he's a big boundary receiver who I think is going to run pretty well. I think that he is going to really, like, I could be wrong here, but I wouldn't be shocked if he pushes like low 4.4s. Like, I think he's going to be moving at the combine. And I think if he runs anything close to that, like, 4.41, 4.42, something like that, he's going, top 15. And that's probably the wrong move. In fantasy perspective right now, I had him as my wide receiver 3. I say that with little conviction. Like, I don't really feel good about that. The last time I was going through my wide receiver rankings, I had him behind Jaxon Smith-Njigba and Jordan Addison. But I think there's a real shot that he could end up below at least Josh Downs, and maybe both Josh Downs and Jalin Hyatt. So it's like a fluid wide receiver 3 for me. I think more likely than not, he ends up somewhere like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. And I think it could be a guy that probably gets drafted for me a little bit too early in rookie drafts, which is unfortunate. Like, I would like to have some shares of him, but I think it's probably going to get a little too out of control based on the fact that I think he'll test fairly well athletically and get some pretty good draft capital, and then somebody will buy way into that. But yeah, he's too inconsistent. And I know he hasn't had the best quarterback play, for 3 years at TCU, but there's too much meat left on the bone, inconsistent hands. And like you said, I don't think he's this big, like, I get how people arrive at the contested catch sort of receiver, but he really doesn't play with the same strength and physicality through those contested catch scenarios that you want somebody of his size to. And then coupled with pretty inconsistent hands overall, it makes it a little tougher to get as excited as I hoped I would have been this time a year ago about him.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of see what everybody loves in that he's a big-bodied outside receiver. He's quick. He is that long strider that I think is going to test really well at the combine. I think that 40 naturally suits a receiver like him that's got that longer stride pattern. That I wouldn't be shocked if he ran really, really fast at the combine. My issue is that we talk about him as a contested catch receiver. He caught 34.8% of contested catches last year. Like that's pathetic.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be a calling card of his. We've got this highlight on the screen that everybody keeps showing me. I keep seeing tweeted constantly about. I can't see it. He runs a drag route. He gets it's they send 6. It's cover 0. He's being covered by a safety who's lined up 15 yards deep. He runs across the formation with nobody anywhere near him. He then catches a check down, essentially, runs across the field and up the sideline, score a touchdown unchallenged. Like, I can't see.
Yeah, just kind of gets lost. Like there's nobody near him.
Like what's in all seriousness, okay, fair enough. He scored like a 70-yard touchdown against a very good team. Great. It was a really important game. But 99% of receivers in the NFL can do that. It doesn't show me anything, and yet everybody keeps holding it up as this incredible highlight that means he's going to be a stud at the next level. I think that, look, I just feel like he's a poor route runner, and I don't think that translates. I don't think he's got the refined skills because I don't think he sets up defenders well. So I think he runs his route as prescribed, but I don't think there's any nuance to it. You don't see him trying to square up a corner, knowing that he's got an outside release so that he can create that separation. He basically runs his route as if somebody's drawn it up on a chalkboard. I think because of being larger, and we talked about him being a long strider, he's not super smooth in and out of his breaks.
Right.
And I just think that for me, I worry if we're saying he's big, he's fast, but he struggles creating separation. And I think that it's the Calvin Johnson theory in that everybody boosts up these big, tall, fast receivers because they're like, Calvin Johnson was the greatest thing ever for fantasy. Let's go and get another one. And we see it every single year. And it's like, yeah, for every DK Metcalf, great. There's also a Terrace Marshall. There's also a Treylon Burks and guys like that. And it's like, this is a really weird class in that there is a lot of smaller, undersized wide receivers that potentially profile as slots at the next level. And it feels like we're boosting him up because he's the only one who's not that.
Agreed.
For me, he's in my tier 3 of wide receivers. But, sorry, I've got that wrong. He's in my tier 2. Jaxon Smith-Njigba's in tier 1. But I've got him behind Jordan Addison, Kayshon Boutte, and Josh Downs. So he's currently my wide receiver 5. Because I think that there's more of a projection on him than some of those other guys that I know might not have the ceiling, but I think that they're going to come in and be able to get open at the next level.
Have you done Jalin Hyatt yet?
I have, and I'll be honest, I didn't like what I saw, but by the sounds of it, you're quite a fan.
I like him, but I think why I've warmed on him is I think he could do a lot of what we think Quentin Johnston can do, and I think he does it better.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So I think Quentin Johnston could be a player that enjoys, I think he could enjoy a better NFL career than he ever will be like a fantasy asset. Like I think he could prove useful for an NFL team. I saw someone comp him to Martavis Bryant, and I kind of like that. It's kind of a good one.
Big, long legs, strider. Yeah.
I forget who it was, so I apologize for not shouting him out, but it's a good comp.
A good shout. I like that.
Yeah, so it's interesting, but I do think he'll run good, and then, man, it's going to be crazy. I think he's going to go way too early that we're all like, wow, and it'll be way too far ahead of Jaxon Smith-Njigba.
Yeah, and I think the thing is it's basically like we were saying about Zach Evans. I don't, as much as I sound like I'm being really critical and don't like him, I don't hate him. And I think that for me, I'd be happy drafting him at the back end of the first round in rookie drafts. The problem is that he's never going to fall to me at the back end of the first round in rookie drafts, because there's always going to be one person in each league who goes, but he's 6'4", 200 plus pounds. He runs this. He's going to be elite, and draft him probably at like the 106, 107, something like that, maybe even higher.
Yeah, but you're spot on. Back end of round 1 is the right spot.
Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Sanctuary. We are diving into some more rookie previews. I've got with me one of the greatest film minds you do not yet know about. He is in the process of putting some incredible content out on Twitter. He's loving some film reviews. I've really enjoyed a lot of the stuff he's doing. It is Jack Brentnall. Jack, how you doing?
I'm really good, thanks, mate. Thank you for having me on. Really good to chat through some of these guys. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. As I said, I've loved what you're doing. Really excited to get to some of the quarterbacks down the end. But before we do that, we're going to start with the glam position, my favorite position, the position that Dynasty Football's all about. No, it's not quarterbacks or running backs. It's the wide receiver. We're going to go with the wide receiver, originally out of Pitt, now at USC, 4-star recruit out of high school. It is Jordan Addison. Little bit on the small side. He's 6 foot, 175 pounds, was uber productive in his sophomore year with Kenny Pickett under center. Jack, are you an Addison fan? What do you make of him?
I am. I really like his game. There are some concerns which I'll come on to, but I think there's a lot to like. I think when you're projecting college receivers to the NFL, there's always that challenge of, valuing traits over other aspects of their game. The one thing that he does for me really well, he's a great route runner. That always translates every year. There's a guy, last year you got Chris Olave, a year before Devontae Smith. Just it translates so well and effortlessly. And he's brilliant. He knows how to manipulate defenders in space. He's got the kind of wherewithal. He's also got that kind of athletic profile to throttle down at the top of his routes, create separation. Again, that's easily translatable. You can see how it works. He's a good athlete as well. You're not getting we all know about, not talking about him today, but Jaxon Smith-Njigba. There's a lot of talk about him being a great route runner. He is, but Addison is also a great athlete. And I think that's the difference between those two guys there. He can be a 3-level threat. I think he caught something like a third of his targets, or a third of his receptions rather, at USC, I think, were screens. But don't let that fool you into thinking he's just an underneath merchant. He can win at every level. He's got the speed to win deep. If you kind of play off coverage, he'll blaze past you. Good hands as well. There were some drop issues at Pitt. I want to say it was like 21 or 23 drops over 2 years.
It was his freshman year, wasn't it? It was pretty horrific in terms of drops.
Yeah, which, there's always the fantasy conversation about how much do drops matter, and I do think they are overrated. But from an NFL coach's perspective, they're going to want a guy who can reliably catch. He's improved massively. He only had 2 drops all of 2022. So you can already see there's a lot to like. He's got that kind of wiggle after the catch too, which, again, if you're a smaller guy with good athleticism, that's what you want to see. You mentioned at the top his size. That's going to be the one thing that worries teams, I think. There's definitely a role for him at the NFL level. I don't think he's kind of too small to be, a good NFL receiver. The question is whether he can still play outside. You can see from these clips, he played, I think, 3/4 of his snaps as a boundary receiver at USC. He's listed at 6 foot, 175. I mean, I always think if you're listed at 6 foot, you're probably 5'10". So he is probably smaller than that. And, then you're starting to talk about, again, the Devontae Smith kind of comparisons. I mean, he's managed pretty well in the NFL. We just saw him put up 100 yards in the Super Bowl. So, there's a lot to like. There are some weaknesses, but it feels like a very kind of high floor player that you can he might never be a wide receiver 1, but he's going to be a very good wide receiver 2 that you'd be happy to have on your roster.
Yeah, I think, you've hit on a lot of the things that I love. My big thing is I'm an analytics guy at heart, but I do love a good route runner, and I think that you watch him on film and he just gets open with ease. I think his ability to almost have a plan on every snap. He sets up a defender very well in terms of whether that's being stacking or kind of getting an inside leverage to then break out. He's very good at that. And to me, that's kind of a next level thing that most players normally learn once they're in the NFL. I think there is the concern about size, and a lot of people will project him as a potential slot at the next level. I think for me, he's got the release package that I think he can play outside. Yes, I think he'd be an excellent slot receiver, and I don't necessarily see that as a knock on him. But I think, you said Devonta Smith, and I think he's naturally going to get a lot of those comparisons because of the size. I see a lot of Deontay Johnson in him, in that I don't necessarily think that because he's not massive, he means he can't play outside. I think he's a good enough route runner. He's a good enough route package, a release package, that he can play outside and can still get open for fun. And he's good with the ball in his hands. And yeah, there's that potential kind of drops thing that Deontay Johnson has had a couple of times. So I think that for me, yeah, he's never going to be what people want to call an alpha. But for fantasy, I don't really care. I think this is a guy that can command 120, 130 targets in the NFL. And yeah, that's fantasy gold right there.
Yeah. I mean, it all comes down to what offense you're playing him in. I can see him leading a team in targets, even if he is never that. Like I say, that alpha, you're not going to want him to be going up against a kind of big-bodied, physical press corner all the time. But I don't think he can't play. Like you said, I don't think he can't play outside. He's got enough shift to kind of make guys miss. If guys get too physical and too much of a kind of handsy approach at the line in press, he will make you pay. So I don't think there's any worry about that. Like you say, it might be a case of bit of outside, bit of in the slot. You can also use him underneath on swing passes and screens. So yeah, easy guy to like.
Absolutely. So we're going to continue with the wide receiver position. I feel like this could potentially be a slightly contentious one. So we're going to talk now about Kayshon Boutte. So I think maybe the single most impressive game of any wide receiver in this entire class was his rookie year against Ole Miss. I seem to talk about it a lot. 5-star recruit, 6 foot, 190 pounds. Broke out in a massive way that freshman year, was producing in his sophomore year before injuries seemed to sidetrack him and derail him slightly. We can probably forget about his junior season. It was, is he coming back to LSU? Is he not? New head coach. Then there's all sorts of red flags about what's going on and the reason why he had to leave LSU. Probably less said about those, the better. But what do you think, Boutte? Are you a fan?
He is the most complicated, difficult eval I've found in this draft class so far. I feel like, I don't know what to think of him. I've watched games from each of the last 3 seasons. You can see exactly why this time last year he'd been hyped up as a first-round prospect. But I put out a tweet the other day and said, if there's one guy this year who's going to do that, fall from being a first-rounder to being a day 3 guy when it comes to the draft, it could be Boutte this year. Starting with what I like, I guess. He's got good size. He's 6 foot, I think 205. That's again your kind of traditional NFL boundary receiver size. He plays big as well. He looks and feels quite like a stocky build. He's surprisingly good after the catch. I think you look at him and you wouldn't maybe think he's going to be like that, but like that for me is what stood out about his game. He's just, you get him on the move underneath. There was I think it was in the game against Georgia in the SEC championship this year, and he took one for 60 yards, I think it was. And it's just like, you get the ball in his hands. He's got great long speed. He's like your classic bigger, fast guy where he's a bit of a long strider. It can take him a little while to really kind of hit that top gear. But once he gets there, he can blaze past you. That's what I like. The concerns I mean, there's the off-field stuff which you kind of touched on there, which, yeah, I'm not going to dive into it. If people want to Google it, then Google it. It's probably one of the craziest off-field stories that you'll find about a draft prospect, at least one of the craziest ones I've ever come across. The on-field one that is the worry is the injuries. So he had right ankle injury last year. Now, if you were to have read kind of any scouting reports on Boutte, last summer, they'd all be talking about his explosiveness, and you can see it, on tape. The problem is when he came back this year, he's got the long speed still. I don't see the twitch. I don't see that kind of short area explosiveness. Now, that might just be a rehab thing. We've seen it before with guys when they come back from an injury and, they don't look quite the same, but then give them another year and they're back to their best. So that's where it's difficult. Are we seeing the Boutte in 2022 that we're going to get in the NFL, or are we seeing a maybe not quite healthy player? For fantasy, it's all going to come down to his draft capital. Like the NFL, if they're taking this guy on day 3, then that's a completely different story to if he's a top 50 pick. I think teams will be all over the place on him as well. Some teams will have him off their board for injury concerns. Some teams will have him off the board for character concerns. But, it is also worth saying, I didn't like how he was used this year. Like if you watch LSU this year, it was like stop routes, hitches, comebacks. And it's like, you can see it on the screen here. This is a guy who's great on the move. Why, every time he's getting the ball, are you getting him the ball when he's stopped? Yeah. Like, put him on, get him on slants, get him on, jet sweeps, that kind of thing. Get him on the move, get him attacking defenders in space, and you'll have plenty of success. So, I mean, there's the tools, but there's the confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that I'm a Boutte fanboy, a Boutte truther, whatever you want to call it. I've loved him since his freshman year, and I've been really excited for him to come out. I think, for me, he's an elite athlete. He's a former track star. He ticks the route running ability. I don't think he's the same technician of someone like an Addison, but I think that he has more wiggle. Perhaps he's a better athlete than Addison, so he doesn't need to be that level of technician. I think that for me, I think that his best attribute is that play after the catch with the ball in hands. You said that he was good. I think he's elite, and I think that'll translate to next level. And I think that whilst I've said that I think Addison is smaller and can play outside, I know Boutte could play outside, but I think he could be dynamite as a kind of a speed slot. I'd love to see him almost like a Christian Kirk plus, in that I think you said there about using him on the move, getting the ball in his hands, using him in space. That's when Christian Kirk has been at his best and done well in terms of production levels. When he's tried to be pigeonholed and used on those intermediate routes where it's, hitches and comebacks and that sort of thing, that's where he struggled. And I think that in the right system, in the right offense, I think Boutte, we could be looking back in a year and saying, should we have been taking this guy in 102, 103? We could also be looking back in a year and he could have completely flamed out the NFL, because there are some serious concerns there. But for me, I'm never going to shy away from a wide receiver being a bit of a diva. Let's be honest, some of the greatest receivers ever have had that little bit of diva in them. And I don't necessarily see that as a red flag. I think that for me, he ticks 3 massive boxes in terms of the athleticism, the route running ability, and the yards after the catch. So, yeah, I really like him a big bit. I think if he doesn't get probably top 50 draft capital, I'm going to be concerned. I think if he starts falling into that back end of the second, early third round, or, I mean, you've talked it into existence in terms of that day 3 capital, that's got me paranoid, because I've thought for sure he was going to be a potential first round pick. So yeah, I'm concerned if he gets to that point. But I think that, like, if he ends up on the Chargers in round 2, he's going to come flying up my board.
I think the thing to say on that, if you've seen Dane Brugler at The Athletic, who is probably the best in the business at draft analysis, he fell out of his top 100 that he released the other day, which is kind of where I was starting to go, okay, maybe there is something to this. But the important thing is, like is always the case with the draft, it only takes one team to fall in love with him. It only takes one team to fall in love with him, spend a pick, take that risk, and then you've got a guy who's taken early on. So
let's just hope that everybody watches his 2021 and 2020 film rather than his 2022 film.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive across now and look at the quarterback position. We're going to start with CJ Stroud out of Ohio State. Not exactly been the greatest recruitment ground, should we say, for NFL caliber quarterbacks, but in the last year or so, maybe that's starting to turn around. We've got some hope. He's 4-star recruit, 6'3", 215 pounds. Ticks a lot of the prototypical size, arm strength, potentially intangible boxes. Jackie, are you a fan?
I am, yeah. I think if there's one guy that you look at and say he looks like an NFL quarterback, it's Stroud. He reminds me a bit of the kind of Dak Prescotts of the world, in that he's, good arm, not an elite arm, good accuracy. He's a good processor. I know people always talk about Ohio State's offense. I liked what I saw from him. I think he's a good decision maker, takes pretty good care of the football. He can decipher coverage. He's comfortable reading kind of post-snap rotations. He's also, and we all saw this in the Georgia game, and I've been saying this since last summer. Like, I watched his tape last summer and I was like, he's a better athlete than people think. Because he wants to win from the pocket. That kind of, again, which I think is a good thing. I always am wary of prospects who can't win within structure. The ultimate example of that is Zach Wilson. And we saw what happened at the NFL level then when, you can make great plays out of structure, but if you can't win from the pocket, you've got nothing. But Stroud, sometimes you wish he would use his legs more, because we saw in that Georgia game, he can create out of structure. He has got a good arm that he can use on the move. I haven't seen it enough. Now, is that an Ohio State offense thing? Is that a Stroud thing? I'm not quite sure. The worry with me when it comes to Stroud is how he handles pressure, particularly pressure from the interior. I think that's always a red flag when you're projecting to the NFL. You're not going to get the kind of clean pockets in the NFL that you often get in college, certainly not playing behind that offensive line with, two really good tackles, a highly regarded center as well. When pressure was in his face, he looked like a different player. He just seemed to struggle. He'd rush throws. His mechanics could then just go out of the window. Lots of kind of throwing off his back foot. That is a worry, because if you're going to get drafted high, you're not going to get drafted behind a good offensive line. So there is an element of doubt, but the rest of his game just feels very well-rounded, very solid, very dependable. Like I say, looks like an NFL starter. Feels, and this is famous last words, feels fairly risk-free when compared to the other guys in this class. In my opinion, if you're going to take a guy and you just want just a good base level quarterback, I'd personally take Stroud.
Yeah, I really like Stroud. I think he does a lot of great stuff. He can make every throw. As you said, in that Georgia game, we saw the athleticism. It would be interesting to see if that gets tapped into more at the next level. Yeah, my concern, and it's basically something that I'm never going to know, because I'd want to get on a board with him and have a talk with him. I don't know how good he is at going from 1 to 2 to 3. There was far too often that I watched and I felt he'd go 1, 1. Oh, now one's open. And I don't think he progressed through reads. And a lot of that is that Ohio State have had some of the best receivers we've seen in college over the last 3 years. And he's been able to trust the guys to get open. And that's a good trait that, at the NFL level, they're not going to be able to get wide open. So you need to trust them to go and win the ball and things. But I just think that I'd want to know his processing ability in terms of progressing through multiple reads within the same play, because at times, I didn't see it.
Yeah, I think the thing with that, again, like say, it's one of those ones where the interviews are going to be so crucial for him. For, oversimplifying it here, but the thing with Ohio State's offense is there are huge amounts of option routes downfield. So we saw this with Justin Fields, right? And people say he's holding on to the ball too long. And it's like, to an extent, that's true, but it's also like you've got to wait ages to see what your guy is going to do. It's not like some offenses where the routes will be predetermined. There's lots of option concepts in there. So it's knowing, like, is he waiting because he needs to see the play develop, or is he waiting because he's just not comfortable working, across full field reads? Like you say, we saw it in flashes. We definitely saw that he can do it. I think he's okay at it, but there is that classic Ohio State question that every time a quarterback comes out of Ohio State, we're going to have this conversation. So
yeah, but I agree with you. I think in terms of if you're looking for floor, if you're looking for something safe, from a fantasy perspective, you hope that rushing production kicks in and gives you that. But I feel like this is going to be famous last words. I feel like he's not going to bust at the NFL level.
Yeah, I'd go with it.
So we're going to go look slightly different quarterback. I think in terms of intangibles, in terms of reading the game, in terms of all that side of things, I've got basically no concerns. We're talking about Bryce Young, 5-star recruit coming out of Alabama. They've listed him 6 foot 194. I'll be honest, if he's 5'9", I'd be shocked. If he's 180, I think I'd be shocked. I'd throw him probably around the 5'7", 5'8", maybe 170, something like that. It ticks so many boxes. Obviously had an incredible career at Alabama. Are you a believer? Are you concerned about the size? Where do you sit, Jack?
I mean, you've got to start with the size, because that is the one big thing. I think sometimes in the pre-draft process we can get over-fixated with, whether it's Kenny Pickett's hand size or, those things. There's always one every year where we're sat there having these conversations. I'm sure that if I remember rightly, Joe Burrow as well, there was the whole, has he got big enough hands to be a good
him
NFL
and Jared
quarterback?
Goff. Him and Jared Goff both had the hand masseuses to make their hand size measurements bigger, didn't they?
And it's just like sometimes you're looking at it and going, there is some truth in this, but with offensive tackles, oh my God, they've got 32.5-inch arms. How are they going to cope? But there is a point where you are that significant of an outlier that you have to really think about it. So, yeah, like you say, listed at 6 foot 194. For context, there hasn't been a first-round quarterback weighing less than 207 pounds since 2003. I think since 1999, there's only been one quarterback that weighs less than 194 pounds. And I think that was some guy out of Georgia Tech in like 2000. I don't even know who he was. So, like, this is rare size, and that's listed size. And like you say, I don't know. I feel like he weighs 194 pounds, like dripping wet. I'm not sure he weighs that. That wasn't his playing weight. I've heard people saying that he was playing more in the 180s. Now, he might get up to that. I think the combine is going to be huge for him and bigger for him than any other quarterback. What does he weigh? But also, what does he measure in at height wise? Again, listed at 6 foot, he's not 6 foot. Like I said with Addison, if you're 6 foot, your college will list you at 6'1" or 6'2". He'll probably be in the kind of 5'10". I think I'd go with 5'10". Which
I've seen a picture of him stood next to Kyler, and Kyler's definitely taller than him. And it's like, I think Kyler's about 5'8". It's like,
yeah. There's the one of De'Aaron King as well, where he's standing with him, and I'm sure De'Aaron King came in at like 5'7" or something. It's like all these pictures are doing the rounds, and like it is going to be a concern. If he's shorter than 5'10", then I'm like, panic button is being pressed, like really being pressed. If he's 5'10", I'm okay with that. We've seen guys who are 5'10" function okay. The big question and the big reason that height matters for quarterbacks is seeing the middle of the field. you'll often see it's true of Kyler, it's true of Russell Wilson. They don't like throwing over the middle of the field. If you see their heat maps, it's all just kind of go balls down the sideline or kind of perimeter passes. I don't think that was an issue with Young. He was actually pretty good over the middle of the field. So I'm not as worried about the height. The worry with the size comes down to durability. And he hasn't had injury issues at Alabama, but we've seen it with mobile quarterbacks in the NFL. And certainly there's never been anybody at his weight, certainly not in the modern era, that have been able to kind of stay healthy. So that would be my worry. But I don't want to just sound like I'm, being a downer on Bryce Young. He is, if he was 6'2" and 225, he'd be unanimous number 1 overall pick, and I don't think there'd be any doubt about it. Like, he's so good at everything else, which is why it's such a difficult thing to evaluate.
Yeah, I think for me, there's kind of like 3 boxes. I think if you take the intangibles, the reading the game, all that kind of thing, I think he's literally generational. We'd be talking about him in the Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck, that kind of aspect. I've heard some concerns about his arm strength. I'll be honest, I don't know if I'm missing some games where it's on display, but I don't see any issues with his arm strength. I think he's able to make every throw. He's making throws from the far hash on outs. Like I think the arm strength is above average. I think it's plenty good enough. Yeah. It's the size. And I think that it sounds ridiculous that we're talking about height, but I think it's an issue in one of 3 scenarios. I think it's an issue if you can't create outside of structure, you can't basically throw from the pocket because you can't create your own throwing lanes, or the interior offensive line is so poor that they can't create that pocket for you. And I think that, if you look at the shorter quarterbacks that have succeeded in the NFL, Kyler, Russell Wilson, they were very good at creating outside of structure. Drew Brees, the Saints, time and time again, would invest super heavily in those 3 interior offensive line positions. So they were able to give him that pocket that he could step up into. And I think for Bryce Young, the way I look at it, I think he does everything very well. I think he's going to be a great quarterback. He can create out structure. Yeah, he's not a Kyler Murray, but I think he's fantastic when he gets out in open space, throwing rather than necessarily being a pure creator with his legs. But I think that if you're drafting Bryce Young, I think you have to be drafting him with a plan that you're saying, right, we're going to invest in the interior of the offensive line. I think his pocket mobility and pocket movement is there, that he can create small throwing lanes and manipulate defenders from that aspect. But you've got to say, right, we're going to draft and spend assets at guard and center because he needs a better pocket than 99% of other quarterbacks in the NFL. And, I think a lot's going to be said by the NFL and where he ends up going. Obviously we've had the talks of Jim Irsay talking about him and then potentially going up and getting him. If the Colts continue to invest on the interior offensive line, Quentin Nelson comes back healthy and he can sit behind those 3, that could be incredible, because I do think that he needs that investment there where most other quarterbacks wouldn't.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think his pocket presence, I don't know if, I think sometimes it gets underrated. I think when we talk about quarterbacks, we can lose track of it by talking about arm strength and, athleticism. His pocket presence is like an NFL veteran. His ability to navigate pressure, like that Alabama offensive line. I think we all have a bit of an assumption that it's Alabama, their offensive line must be good. It's like, it really wasn't. Like, it really wasn't that good. His ability to navigate those murky pockets, that's what's really like gonna see you have success in the NFL. Because again, if you're going to get drafted high, that's what you're going to have to do. I agree with you on the arm. I don't think it's an elite arm. We're going to come on to a couple of guys who I think have got elite arm strength, but it's good enough. Like I didn't have any issues with it. It's more than enough to get the job done. So when you add that with pocket presence and athleticism, ability to create outside of structure, it's easy to see why an NFL team is going to fall in love with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to dive to perhaps the most divided quarterback, I think, in terms of opinion. I've seen some people say he's the 101. I've seen some people say that he shouldn't be a first round pick. I've seen some people say that he shouldn't be a day 2 pick. Like, I feel like I've read every take you can have about him. I think it's very much a Rorschach test of you see what you want to see in terms of Will Levis. I think there is absolutely some nice traits. There is some talent, but there's also some stuff that really scares me. So he's a 3-star recruit. He's a senior out of Kentucky, 6'3", 232 pounds. Jack, are you a believer, or do you think that he is nothing but a couple of intangibles?
I wanted so bad to be a Will Levis fan. I really wanted to. I remember when I went into his film over the summer and was like, I want to like this guy because I'd seen the highlights, I'd seen the flashes. I'm really, really not a Will Levis fan. And the more games that I watch, the more games I'm like, nope, this is just not the guy. And it's not because he puts mayo in his coffee. It's because I just don't like the tape. The intangibles, yeah. I mean, we've all heard the Josh Allen comp, which I feel like is now going to be every year for the next 10 years. A big guy who throws the ball hard is going to be called Josh Allen. But like, you can see it because, he has an insane arm. Like, the ball just flies out of his hand. Just special. Like, if he was in the NFL tomorrow, you'd be talking about him kind of in that top 5 arm strength group. He's mobile. I guess that's where the Allen comp makes a little bit of sense because it's that kind of ability. He's not the Bryce Young of like quick and elusive and shifty, but he's got decent speed. He's pretty good in short yardage. You can use him as a design runner. But I think, like you said, I think it's just tools. I will be fair and say his supporting cast, particularly this year at Kentucky, wasn't great. He lost, obviously, Wan'Dale Robinson last year. He lost, I think, his starting center, starting right tackle. There was a change of offensive coordinator as well. Now, that's a fair point, and you have to factor it in. I think he also had issues with injury this year. He missed a game, and then I don't think he was fully healthy when he came back, which I think is where you saw his worst tape. The Tennessee game sticks in my mind as a particularly awful game. But you've got to evaluate what you see. You can't make excuses. The decision-making is really poor. The decision-making is just really bad. He really just lingers on his first read far too often. He just doesn't see things. There are a number of times where you're seeing the defense rotate their coverage, and he just doesn't seem to pick up on it. He will miss defenders, where he just needs to see the coverage better, and he's just still not able to. Now, second season as a starter, again, maybe that'll improve. But let's not forget he's an older rookie. I think he's 24 or he's 20 or will turn 24 as a rookie, I think.
Yeah, he's 23 at the moment.
Yeah. And I mean, if you've got a 20-year-old who is like a raw ball of clay like he is, I'd be more willing to buy into it. But I don't know. It's just he's oblivious in the pocket as well. Like, I like a quarterback who will stand in under pressure, but there was a play against Florida where, like, he's throwing hot and he needs to realize that there is a free rusher, and he just doesn't, and he just gets completely, like, it's like you're watching the WWE. He just gets completely laid out, and you can't do that in the NFL.
Yeah, we've literally just seen it on the tape in terms of the free runner knocks his helmet off. Yeah. Just as you said, he needs to be alert of that. I think for me, as you said, I like a lot of it. The arm talent you can't not love, the physical nature, the ability to stand in the pocket, the potential rushing upside. 9 touchdowns in his junior year. there's things to like, but I just don't see him put it together. I think that, we talked about someone like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud and how they develop in terms of progression reads. I never saw it from Will Levis. Again, I've seen 6 games of his, and I don't think I saw more than probably 10 times where I'd see him get to a third read. There's probably not that many where he even got to a second. It is very much one and done in terms of his read, and sometimes he'll just throw it to the guy even if he's not open because he doesn't progress from there. I think I hear the Josh Allen comps, and yes, it's because he's big and strong, but where Josh Allen is incredible is he's so good out of structure. Levis, every time he gets out of the pocket, he seems to just be flustered and unable to set his feet, have sound fundamentals, and pick a pass. He tends to sail the ball. The mechanics fall apart outside the pocket. There's times in the pocket where he gets lazy, and I think his arm level drops, and he doesn't set a solid foundation. Yes, stuff like that can get cleaned up at the NFL, but it's just, it's more things that teams need to spend time with him. And I'll be honest, I was completely wrong on Josh Allen for a lot of these things, but Josh Allen is the only quarterback basically ever that has improved in terms of his completion percentage and his accuracy from college to his first year to his second year to his third year. I don't see it from Will Levis, and I'm in rookie draft, Superflex. If someone wants to reach up and grab him in, the middle of the first, I'm happy to let him. If he falls to the back end of the first, I'll probably have some shares. But I just, there's too much stuff, too many question marks that I think are key to the quarterback position that he just doesn't tick.
Yeah.
So we're going to go across now to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, your favorite prospect in the draft?
I love Anthony Richardson. Yeah.
It's what's there not to love? So he's a redshirt sophomore out of Florida. He's a 4-star recruit, 6'4", 236 pounds, an uber athlete, an incredible player with the ball in his hands, super dynamic. Away, Jack.
I mean, yeah, I was, when he came out, I'd not studied him much during the season because he was a redshirt sophomore, and you think, right, he's going to go back to school. I don't see him declaring. And then he did, and I was like, wow, okay, that's a surprise. I mean, that told me immediately, like, he's getting good feedback from NFL teams because you don't declare as a redshirt sophomore unless you are getting really good feedback. I dived into the tape, and I wasn't sure what I was going to get. I was really pleasantly surprised. You see the size and the arm strength and the fact that he's a good athlete. And I've seen a lot of people use that as a way of going, well, him and Levis are in a kind of similar bucket. They're both big guys with big arms who can move. And it's like, no, they're really not. I don't understand how you can't have, if you like tools, Richardson needs to be ahead of Levis for you. Like, I can understand. I'm not saying I would do this because it would be a risky move. I can understand why a team would take him number 1 overall. And that might be like seen as crazy to some. And I do get that. Like, let's be honest, the film is raw. There is some real areas that he needs to work on. You'll see it in these clips. His mechanics are a mess. Like, maybe the worst I've studied in this year's class. I'm about 10 quarterbacks in this year, and certainly his lower body mechanics are probably the worst. Like, his footwork's a complete mess. You'll see the odd play where it's absolutely perfect, and then the next play, it's a mess. He bounces a lot in the pocket. He just gets disjointed, and that leads to his accuracy issues. He completed 50-something% of his passes in 2022. He was, if you look at adjusted completion percentage, he was 141st out of 155 FBS quarterbacks. So yeah, that's not good. But mechanics are fixable. Like, certainly like footwork. We've seen guys come in. Don't forget, this is his first year as a starter. Get him in an NFL program with a good quarterback coach, certainly over this offseason as well. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see quite a substantial improvement between this season in the combine. If he's at the combine and he's throwing at the combine, I wouldn't be surprised to see some improved footwork. But in terms of what's there to like, I mean, the arm is elite. The arm is absolutely elite in terms of his arm strength. He can hit every single throw. His ability to do it off platform is also just rare. Like, there really aren't many guys, even in the NFL, I think, who can make some of those throws that he can make. He's a legit athlete as well. Like that LSU game, he had that massive touchdown run. And you're just looking at him, he's like 200, he's listed at 232 pounds. You think, okay, he's going to be a big bruiser. I mean, he was separating from defensive backs in the open field. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he ran in the 4.4s. It's probably more like the 4.5s if he does run at all. I mean, quarterbacks don't tend to run these days, certainly the more athletic ones. So he might not, but I'd be expecting like 4.5s at least. But I think what doesn't get talked about enough is his pocket presence. He had a 9.2% pressure to sack rate, which is easily the best amongst draft eligible quarterbacks. I was looking at this the other day. It's better than almost all of the top guys in the NFL achieved during their time in college. I think Mahomes was somewhere around 10%, and he's like the best in the NFL at doing that, along with everything else. But that ability to navigate pressure, that ability to work the pocket, to climb the pocket, to feel pressure, that's a rare thing, especially in a guy in his first year starting. Like, that's special. Add in his ability to actually read coverage. Don't get me wrong, it is still a work in progress at times, but there's a play that sticks out from the Utah game where they ran a really funky kind of inverted cover 2 that just completely different picture post-snap to pre-snap. Richardson, not flustered at all, finds the right throw. It was like a 3rd and 15 as well, and he got the first down. And you look at that and you think, wow, that's an NFL throw, because that's the kind of coverage you're going to see on a Sunday. So if he can do that, yeah, he needs to improve on his consistency. But I'm seeing absolutely everything that you want, or nearly everything other than the accuracy.
And I think that's the biggest difference from me between him and Levis, is that I never really saw Levis wanting to progress through his reads. Richardson made wrong reads. Sometimes, as you said, his accuracy can wane. I think sometimes he tries to kind of fire the ball through the door rather than place it in the keyhole, and he's trying to throw the ball too hard rather than drop it in. But there is a willingness to almost try. There's a willingness to try and progress through reads. There's a willingness, he was a better athlete than 90% of the players on the field with him. But he wasn't just, right, first read, now I'm taking off, I'm going to run for 10 yards. He was trying to get it done from the pocket. And yeah, when he had to, he broke the pocket, and he was great at it. When he had to, he was able to throw off platform. He was able to scramble, but he wasn't just trying to do it the second that he had to. And I think that for me, I don't think I'd get there, but Richardson is the only player in this draft class that I could see me taking 101 other than Bijan. Because I think that if you believe in the talent, if he gets potentially top 15 draft capital with his rushing production that you're going to have at the next level in a Superflex league, he could be an absolute cheat code. We've seen it with Justin Fields this last year, where his value went from not being worth a first round pick to now you probably can't get him for anything less than 3 firsts. And that's what Anthony Richardson could be, because he has that elite rushing upside. And yes, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking him at 101. I'm not taking him at 102 at the moment, because there are those concerns. There are still a lot of, you talked about his mechanics, a lot of elements that need work in terms of reading the game and basically breaking down defenses. But the raw talent is there, the potential is there. And if he gets the right landing spot and an ability, I know we talk about rookie quarterbacks and it's, it would be great if they sat. It really would be good if Anthony Richardson could sit and work on those mechanics and find an offense that he can get settled into and can use his strengths so that he can develop. But I don't think he's like a Malik Willis, where Malik Willis was drafted and it was like, right, okay, this guy's probably 2 years away from being an NFL caliber quarterback. I think Richardson could get there immediately. I just want him to have some time to get settled in so that he can not be rushed.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I've seen the Willis comparison being made as well, and again,
It's just lazy.
It's daft. It's like, oh, okay, he's a good athlete and he can like throw the ball through a barn door. Like, there you go. I also don't think there's a coincidence that Anthony Richardson's black and he gets compared to Malik Willis. Will Levis is white. He gets compared to Josh Allen, and it's like, come on, like, there's, there's such different players. Like, Willis was playing in a really gimmicky RPO heavy Liberty offense against really bad competition and looked bad against bad competition. Richardson's playing in the SEC, executing pro concepts. Like you say, consistency's not there, but you do see him make those progressions. You do see him find kind of the backside reads. You see full field stuff at times. They're not the same. I'm with you. I'd probably want him to sit. I wouldn't be terrified of him starting as a rookie, but I'd want him to sit. If you can land him in somewhere like, Indy or Carolina, I think that could be really, really good for him. Certainly Carolina with a guy, like Frank Reich, that'd just be an exciting offense to see him in. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going, top 5. I've even got a bet on him going number 1 overall. So we'll see. That might be wishful thinking on my part, but we'll see.
Might be, but if you're going to shoot for the stars, he's the guy I'd absolutely do it with. Hello and welcome into the Fantasy Sanctuary. We're back. The rookie previews continue. Today, I'm joined by yet another incredible guest. He's 1/3 of the Devy Royale. He has just released an incredible rookie guide, which if you hadn't read yet, I urge you to go and get for Football Guys. He was the inaugural Tags Rising Star Award winner. Of course, I'm talking about Kevin Coleman, or as you may know him, at @theboys_22. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I got the call up. I've been following you guys for a long time, you and Tom, and I was like, man, when are they gonna ever hang out with me? But now they do. So I'm glad we got the call up and we can talk about these guys and kind of dive into them.
No, so thank you very much for coming on. It's it's absolutely delight you coming on, and let's dive in and talk some rookies. So so we're going to start with Marvin Mims. So 4-star recruit out of high school, wide receiver, Oklahoma. Slightly undersized, 5'11", 177 pounds. Are you a Mims fan, Kevin?
Yeah. So I always like to preface these things too. Like when we're talking about these guys, like it's all based on value, right? So like the way I look at rankings and everything like that is, okay, let's look at value. Let's talk about dynasty, where they're at. And like right now, he is a value in a rookie draft. So like, so if because I've done tons of these things. So I've done like, I don't even know, hundreds of mock drafts already. And when you're just looking at it from a production standpoint, yeah, I think he's a value when you're looking at him because I call him so this might be bad, but I call him the discount Zay Flowers because Zay is going really high, whereas Marvin's analytical profile and everything is pretty close to Zay's. And you're like, well, I can get Marvin in the 3rd round as opposed to like Zay, where he's going like late 1st, early 2nd. So I kind of look at that when you're looking at just his numbers. We did a thing on our Patreon with Jay Stein, and he goes over all kinds of their analytical breakdowns. And he really turned me on to a lot of good things about him. Like his ADOT was really good. When you're looking at his ability to kind of 18 or more yards on receptions is there. And then overall, just for us, when we talk about the rookie guy, I think he has good speed and ball skills to stretch defenses. He has some return game. So if you're worried about him making a roster, I wouldn't. Because he's going to be able to get on the field. So when you're talking about getting on the field, that's what you're looking for. And in open space, you'll see it here as you're watching the tape. If you're watching on YouTube, like he can kind of maneuver in space. He does a good job there. The only thing that I would say is like I'm worried about. He has limited slot experience. He actually played on the outside a lot at Oklahoma, so he's more than likely going to be a slot guy at the NFL level. So like he's going to have to get better at that. So that's something to kind of look at. And then like, hey, physical coverage, contact. You're not going to notice that on film. Like a lot of these teams do not play up and bump and run in those areas. So if he's on the outside, I think he's going to struggle there. But I like him. I think he's a value right now. If he stays in that 3rd round range, I think he's the perfect value wide receiver at that spot.
Yeah, I find myself an awful lot higher than pretty much anybody. I really like him. I think, there are some size concerns, absolutely. But I feel like there's size concerns about 90% of this wide receiver class. They all seem to be small, undersized kind of profilers, slot guys at the next level. I have a slight concern about his hands. I don't think, from what I've seen, I don't think he's a natural kind of hands catcher. There's a lot of arms, there's a lot of bodies, rather than kind of going out and extending to the ball. But in terms of athleticism, speed, route running ability, I think he ticks a lot of boxes. And I think, as you said, he feels like a value at the moment. And I hope that kind of continues, because I quite like the idea of potentially getting some decent shares at that sort of back end of the second round, as you said, sometimes into the third. I don't quite get why the community are seen to be so low on him, because I think he does a lot of good things. And I think the concerns are, as I said, similar to a lot of the other wide receivers in this class. Do you think that lack of slot work is the kind of thing that's potentially holding him back at the moment?
I think it could be. I think also as a whole, I think that like when you're looking at him, his floor is probably what makes people nervous, because he's kind of a boom bust guy. So I think like, these other receivers in this class tend to have a higher floor, just are assumed to have a higher floor. But then I go back to the value thing when I'm looking at it. So like you said, if you can get Mims at the late second, so realistically right now, you really want like late first to mid seconds, all where the running backs are. So you're like all these running backs, that tiers in there. Like if you take a wide receiver in that, you better hope they hit, because you're probably passing on a running back that's going to have some type of impact fantasy wise in that area. If you wait on Mims in the late second, third, the tiers drop. Like the tiers go way down in that running back in position, to where you're like, hey, I don't mind taking him here. But that's what I think it is. I think it's his floor is a little concerning for some. I do think that when you're watching him, if you're talking about like what he can do, I think he does very good deep and, intermediate range. He can do those type of things. But he doesn't have a ton of tape on just like short routes and ability to kind of separate those type of things. Like that is kind of where the red flag is. Like we comped him to Curtis Samuel from the Redskins, or excuse me, man, that's old school. Commanders. I'm getting old. From the Commanders. And, when you're looking at that, I think he could be Curtis in terms of that boom bust type area. He's a smaller guy, so weight wise, but I think overall, like that's a pretty good fantasy comp for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite like that. I think for me, the thing that I keep coming back to as well, anytime you can be an 18-year-old freshman and have a yards per route run over 4 and a targets per route run over 30%, like that's very much going to pique my interest. And I think that there's an awful lot of potential, and I'm really excited about what he could be at the next level.
Yeah, and he played with 3 different quarterbacks too. So that's something to note. Like, when you're looking at what he was able to do, he with Rattler, with Caleb, and then with Dylan Gabriel, and then kind of like some, Gabriel's hurt a couple games this year and he still put up 1,000 yards receiving. So he has played with different systems, different quarterbacks, and he was still able to be kind of consistent at production.
Gonna have a look at Zay Flowers now. It feels like this is the guy that's starting to get the momentum behind him. We've talked about PFF have got him as their wide receiver 2 in the class. I've seen some reports today that he's guaranteed to be a first-round pick in April's NFL draft. 3-star recruit out of high school, 5'10", 177 pounds, was a senior at Boston College. Kevin, do you think that he's got that elite upside that people seem to believe?
This one's hard for me, man, because I love Zay. Like Zay was my guy going into like 3 years ago. I was like the only one talking about Zay. I was like, dude, this guy's really good. And I put him in a lot of our profiles. And now the hype's getting a little bit where I'm like, man, it's getting a little bit out of control. But we have seen kind of these first round guys go where we're like, oh, wow, he got first round draft capital. And I think Zay could be there. When you look at him overall, like he has good sudden, he's very sudden after the catch ability. Like he has that pretty well. Like he gets it in space, and you'll see that if you're watching the YouTube. Like he gets that, does that very well. Plays the ball well downfield too. Like when you watch him throw deep and get those things, like those are things you like to be. Has the ability to work inside and out as well. So like I think he's versatile in that mindset. Like he can do that. And he produced 1,000 yards, ACC receiver of the year. Good 50-50 ability, kind of gets it up there, and he has that. He's strong for his size. But I think that to me the biggest question mark, and we're gonna find this out at the combine, is what's his 40. How fast is he? Like, where is that going to be in terms of that speed? Because that's going to, his 40, I feel like is going to be that one thing that we determines whether or not he's going to be kind of a first round pick or not. And whether you think the 40 matters, I know some people don't, but the NFL seems to care about it, especially at the combine and for like that draft capital stuff. So that's where I'm looking at is like, all right, what is his 40 going to be? Because I think his ideal fit is like in the West Coast system. Like Boston College tend to kind of run that a little bit, that play action, the timing, those type of thing, and yak opportunities. If he finds himself himself in a system where you're like, he has to create for himself in terms of deep and vertical scheme, like that's where I'd be concerned.
Yeah, I think for me, he's good. He's just good across the board. I don't see many holes. You said he lines up inside, lines up outside. The route running's nice. He's got that change of tempo, the subtle body fakes to kind of throw defenders off balance. Yeah. He's got good hands. He's good after the catch. He just, I don't know what is great. And I think that's my kind of concern, is that I think if you're looking for holes, I don't think he has any. But if you're looking for that one thing that kind of you can hang your hat on and say, he's going to be elite at that at the next level, at the moment, I don't see it. And I think he's very unlikely to disappoint in terms of what he's going to do at the next level. But I just don't know if he's ever going to be that kind of go-to playmaker on an offense. I don't know if he's ever going to be more than probably a number 2 option at the next level.
And that's the issue, right? And that's the issue with like the value where he's at. Like he's going right in those running backs that you want to probably grab late first or early second. And so you really got to make sure you want to hit on that, right? That profile. We comped him to Darnell Mooney, which I think has a similar trajectory in terms of fantasy output. Now, Darnell's been struggling because of the offense that he's been in, and he kind of had that quarterback play, and then Fields kind of stepped up a little bit this year, but we didn't see him take that leap yet. Like I could see him being like that as a fantasy asset. And that's the question, is like, you have to be very comfortable with who's on that board right there and where do you think he's at? Because I think that of those guys in that space, he's more of that dependent, like, all right, scheme dependent. Where does he go? How are they going to use him? Can he be that second guy in an offense or a third guy that can actually produce and do those things? So yeah, you're right. Like there's nothing that, like, he's just very solid. There's nothing that you're like, oh my God, I can't believe he does this. He doesn't have that top end speed. He's not Tyreek Hill. He's not doing these things. And then at the other end, there's nothing that he does really too bad. I think he's there, and he's an older prospect too. So if you take that into account, 4-year kid, obviously, and whether or not you look at that in terms of breakout, those type of things, like that's something also to know.
Diving across to the tight end position now. I've seen this described as the best overall tight end class that we've seen in 10 years. I don't know if I'm quite there yet, but this guy, there's an awful lot to love. Former basketball player, shock, transition into tight end. A journeyed college career, shall we say. Slightly older prospect at 23, but 6'4", 242 pounds, out of Utah. Dalton Kincaid. Kevin, are you a believer that he could be the next fantasy superstar at tight end position?
Well, first, I do want to so for the rookie guide, those of you that are, if you will, you have it. I did all the tight ends, and to the person of this, like I was the tight end guru here as we split up other stuff. This is a loaded class, like in terms of just value, but there's a lot of the other thing, and I'm glad you brought up his profile. A lot of these guys are old. So a lot of the tight ends in this class are all the COVID year guys, the guys that got an extra year, and they're all 5th year guys. Like you're looking, when you go across the board through their profile, you're like, man, this guy was in college for a long time. Yeah, he was. Like, that's just the reality of this class. I think, when you look at it, the one thing to note about him, and again, if you want to use this, yeah, he played in college for 5 years because he transferred from Division II San Diego team. His first year playing tight end was in 2017 in high school, and then 2018 was his real first year actually at that position. So he's kind of got a receiver background as well. So in his ability to kind of go up there, we love the basketball guys and the football guys. We love that with our tight end position. I think he could be. I mean, he's getting buzz right now as tight end 1. So there's a lot of draft guys out there right now. They're saying, hey, Kincaid's tight end 1. Fantasy wise, he could be that. I think he's going to test probably better than Mayer. I think the really question is like Mayer's testing is what's going to scare some people. I don't know if Mayer's going to run the 40, to be honest with you. I don't know if he wants to, because we saw this happen time and time again with tight ends. And I think that's the question mark. Kincaid, on the other hand, athleticism, hands, he's got a great catch radius. Like, this kid's going to go up and go get it. I love that for him. Yak ability, he does that really well, as just getting into like space. He was Utah's one option. Not that Utah had very many options, because their receiver room is one of the worst in the country. But when you're looking at, they had Kuth there, and when he got hurt, he really elevated his game. I thought they used him in a lot of variety of different ways. He can almost run every route. Like, when you're watching him, there's not anything seam route. He can get split out wide. Like, I think that's where many people like talk about him. And I think his versatility at that position is what fits the NFL. But again, there are some question marks, right? Run blocking is not a thing for him. He's not a blocker. Like when you're watching him, he's going to have to figure that out. I think if a team's going to use him and want to utilize him, they're going to maybe have to play a little 12 personnel and have him be the off guy, the guy that's going to be split out wide, or the guy that's going to be the receiver if they want to run it. I think that his size could be maybe an issue at 242. I don't know what he's going to come in at. Knowing these guys and how they do it, he'll be up there. But again, for me, it's, hey, he can be, but any of these tight ends, I don't know what your strategy is with tight ends, but mine is they got to be the number 2 target getter on a roster. Like if I'm going to really give me a lot of if I'm going to invest draft capital, I'm going to invest all this stuff in a guy, he better go to a team that has he knows he's going to get the second most targets, because that's really what I'm looking for at this position. I see a lot of people mock him to the Bengals. I would probably not like that. I mean, I like their offense, but where are the targets going to come from? If Higgins is still there and Boyd and these guys, you're looking at a player that maybe gets 4 catches, 6 yards and a touchdown, and you're happy with that. But I would love for him to find a spot where he could be that second target guy overall. And I think he's right there at tight end 1. I don't see I don't hate it. I think it really just comes down to a lot of these things with the tiers and where they're at. He's in tier 1. And then if he gets to a spot, you're like, oh, he's going to get targets and he's going to be that second guy. Then I'll move him up.
Yeah, I think as a receiver, there's a lot to love. I think he's got some of the best hands of any receiver in this class, whether that be tight end or wide receivers. I don't think I saw him drop a ball at all on film. I think as a route runner, I think he is a technician. I think he is able to set up defenders. He's able to find those soft spots in zones, tick all those boxes that we kind of look for. The problem is that he is a pure F. There is absolutely no world, you mentioned it, that he can line up as a Y inline tight end and be utilized at the next level, because the blocking is, let's say, poor. I think that might be a bit generous. I think it is
non-existent. It's not there. It's just not there.
And I think that is going to be a challenge, because if you're basically saying this is Mike Gesicki, is he going to have to line up as a wide receiver 80-90% of the time? And that basically limits the number of offenses that are going to want to add him to a few. And I don't know if he's got it's basically his ceiling is potentially someone like Mark Andrews, who can line up outside 70-80% of the time and be an elite fantasy option, or his floor is what we saw from Mike Gesicki this last year. And I struggle knowing where he comes in that range, because there is absolutely some traits that get you excited, the hands, the route run ability, his work as a receiver. But I worry that he could find himself only on the field in those true passing downs, and he becomes like a 40-50% snap guy, and that's just not got great fantasy appeal.
It doesn't. And I will say, I don't know if you listen to it. It's a podcast here. It's called Move the Sticks. It's with Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah. It's one of my favorite podcasts ever. And Bucky and Daniel, they always talk about this, and it always rings true. He always says, good teams and great teams draft players with a plan. And so, to me, Kincaid fits that to a T. When they were talking about all these guys, the team that drafts Kincaid has to have a plan. Okay, we know what we're going to use him for in our offense. This is the piece we're missing. We're going to use him in this way. Not, oh, he's best player available on the board. He's a tight end. Let's draft him, because teams will do that. They just say, hey, best player available. We need a tight end. We don't know how we're going to use him. We'll figure it out. And that would be the worst thing for Kincaid. Kincaid is that kind of piece that you're like, hey, we know what we're going to use him for. We're going to dial him in here. I feel like Kyle Pitts went to a team that doesn't use him right, doesn't utilize him in the way that he could kind of be. And I know, I'll get those people out there that say, Arthur Smith's amazing and everything's there. I get that. But they drafted Pitts, best player available, and then they said, well, we'll figure it out. And they haven't figured it out yet. That first year was okay, and their quarterback was a mess. Kincaid is that let's do this. Let's have it. And that's what, when you're looking at who's mocked to him. So if you guys don't do this, mock draft database, a pretty good database. The guy that runs it's really good guy. And he basically takes all the mock drafts out there. So, Bengals are on there for him. Again, like I said, they might utilize him, but again, where the target's going to be. Green Bay, is that a position I want? I don't think they take a tight end in the first anymore if Rodgers isn't going to be there. I think maybe they kind of move on there. The Saints, that would be kind of gross, I guess. I don't know. They got Quentin Johnston there already. And then what does that quarterback room look like? The Jaguars would be the only one that I would like be like, huh. But then again, where the target's going to be like, so I think that's like with Kincaid, it's just hope that the team that's drafted him is a great team that has a plan. That's really where that was a long way of saying that, but that's what I mean.
Going to look at the running back position now. We're going to go with Tank Bigsby. As the name suggests, he is a big guy, walk off the bus kind of specimen. 4-star recruit out of high school, 6 foot, 208 pounds. All SEC first team in his freshman year. Now, when a guy does that, you absolutely have to take notice. Kevin, are you a Bigsby believer, or do you think there's some big holes in the game?
No, he's weird because at the beginning of this process, I thought people were going to overvalue him. And I think he's getting undervalued right now a little bit in terms of everything that we're seeing from him. I think when we're looking at Tank, like my co-host, Christian Williams, is a big Tank guy. He actually took him at 105 in one of our recent mocks that we did. So like he loves Tank. Like Tank's one of those guys that's there. I think that, he's not going to probably have elite testing numbers. So when you're looking at him, like based on our profiles right now that we have on our Patreon, we put him at 4.48, but that's kind of the high side first 40. That's kind of recorded before. So I don't know necessarily what's going to hit that, but if he hits in that 4.48 range, then I'm going to be all aboard. Cause I think that's I think the question is for his testing there. But he played in a pretty bad offensive line the last 3 years. Overall though, he broke out as a freshman, 800 yards, those 5 touchdowns. His sophomore year, not a very good offense, 1,000 yards. Last year, again, coach got fired after the middle of the year, 970 yards still. Didn't see the usage that he saw the year before. He's actually probably more efficient last year than he was his sophomore year. And so I think that is really good. He drives defenders. He gets it back. I do think that when you're looking at him, his ability to kind of maintain composure, break tackles, I think is one good thing for him. Like he has good contact balance, force missed tackles with creativity as well. Like, so if you're looking for a guy that can create for himself in the red zone, he can make guys miss. He's going to be that guy that's going to score touchdowns. I think Bigsby can be that guy. I think his size is good. He might get up to the 215 mark by the time the combine rolls around. He's at 208 listed, but usually these guys go and they eat like me, and then they get up to like 215, 220 by the time they get there. So if they do that, I think he's got a good enough lateral agility to break to the outside. Like he does a lot of good things that you like. Like he's a very solid running back. Like, and I don't think of all the prospects, he doesn't have that many question marks. Like long speed would be the big one. Not the greatest pass catcher, but still has the ability to do it. So like from a PPR perspective, I get maybe hesitating a little bit on that. Pass blocking is something that's like it's important, but it's also overrated a little bit when we talk about like knocks against guys. But you'll see it here. He catches the screen, able to do that, gets in the second level, makes guys miss. Like those are the things that you really like about Bigsby. So like I think he's a very solid play right now. He's a pretty good value and going a second round of drafts, like because that running back class is so loaded. So if you can get him at those spots, like I'm all aboard. Like Bigsby is very just solid back. Like nothing really is going to be like, oh my God, pop off tape, but nothing also is going to be like, oh, I'm going to scare away from this guy. So it's kind of like Zay in that mindset of like what we mentioned on the Zay Flowers one of like just a very just solid guy, solid back that's going to probably be in the league for a while.
Yeah, I really like him. I think there's a lot to like in terms of his vision. I think he's good. I think that contact balance is great. I think he's got a natural running style that I think will translate really well to the next level. I do have a concern about the receiving work, and I think that you look at the raw numbers. He had 28 targets in his sophomore year, 42 targets in his junior year. Like he was utilized in the passing game. But if you put on the tape, and he basically never ran a route other than a dump off or a screen pass. Yeah. Like he was never utilized as a receiving back other than let's try and get you the ball in a little bit of space. I mean, you look at his ADOT, it was minus 1.8 in his final year. Like that's basically telling you everything you need to know in that he wasn't ever asked to go and do anything as a receiver. And that's a concern. I think I'm really intrigued to see how he runs routes at the combine and if they, basically how good a route runner is he, because it's a massive question mark. I think for me, he's a safe kind of 1A back for the NFL, but I don't know if he's ever going to be a 3-down back. And for fantasy purposes, that's basically what would stop him being a first-round pick to me, is that do I think he's ever going to get utilized in the receiving game? Because I don't think he's going to be a Derrick Henry level player that the receiving game doesn't matter. So I think that for him to be a first round pick in rookie drafts, I need to see something in terms of that route running and those hands, because he was basically never asked to catch. So I don't know what his hands are like, quite frankly.
That's the problem with, like, and that's what I was trying to get at with like his coaching staff, because he didn't have guys that really used him in those ways, and it might have been the system and it might have been him, right? That's a big unknown. Like we don't know that. Like we don't know what's going to happen. Like you just said, like the biggest thing is you get him in the drills and seeing him what he does in the drills and how that kind of looks at overall too, like draft capital wise, he's been between right now 4th and 3rd. Like, so obviously the combine's huge for him, because I think that's going to either put him in that mark where he's going to get drafted there. But again, we've seen him in different marks, like with where Tank is going. In terms of that, like some people have him mocked to like the Eagles later, like maybe not taking the 1st round. Imagine him kind of being in that system again, though. Hurts would hurt that as well. But we have him comped, and it's funny that you mentioned like, where do you when you're looking at him, is he a 3-down guy? Does his pass catching? We have him comped to Josh Jacobs in terms of like what he could be, like a ceiling wise.
Yeah,
and I think it's fair, because you're talking about a runner. I think they have very similar run styles. Like when you're watching both of these guys play, like their ability to play the game and run and contact balance and between the tackles and all that, they really closely align in terms of, and that's what I think comps are for. So I don't know. I saw somebody post something recently about like comps are garbage, or comps. I don't think that's true. I think comps can be. I'm really bad at comps, but I think overall, like comps could be one of those things where you use and you're like, all right, what is his projected like? All right, ceiling. What does that look like? So that's what we try to do with the guide. Is like, all right, if he hits all those numbers and he gets that 3rd round draft capital and he kind of hits that testing measures that you like to see, he could be Josh Jacobs and no pass catching. And then you're like, okay, well, Josh Jacobs won some leagues last year. Maybe he's a little bit below that next tier of Josh Jacobs. Maybe he's like, that running back to Josh Jacobs that he was early in the career, but that'd be okay for Bigsby because of where his value's at right now. So that's kind of how I would project it too. But you're right. Like, I don't know necessarily if he's ready to be a 3-down guy. But again, that's where the combine's going to come into play.
Wow. What can be said about Devon Achane? So crazy fast, uber athlete, produced in the SEC, but listed at 5'9", 185 pounds. I think that's a little bit generous. 4-star recruit at high school, playing for Texas A&M. Kevin, do you think that the burst and elite high-end athletic traits are going to translate and allow him to get on the field?
Oh, we're going to have to talk about this guy. I really like I love his speed. Like his speed, like he already talked about all of a sudden, like, I don't know if you saw this. He recently posted, like, I'm going to get the 4.2 and the 40. Can you imagine what he's going to do if he hits 4.2 in the 40? People are going to lose their damn minds. Like, that's just what they're going to do. And then I saw somebody underneath said, I wish he would get the 195 instead. And it's completely true. Like, he has track speed, but does he have the strength and the size to be able to withstand? Like, I think it's so hard with these guys, like in terms of like, we've seen what the NFL has said. So like every year, like since who hurt me was Gainwell. So Kenneth Gainwell was almost 200 pounds when he came out of Memphis, and he was a good pass catching back. And, he didn't play because of the COVID year and all that. And I was like, man, this kid is really good. And I'm all aboard, like the Gainwell trend. I thought, hey, Gainwell is going to buck the trend of sub 200 guys. Well, Gainwell didn't buck the trend of sub 200 guys. He just didn't. And in over time, we've learned what the NFL thinks of guys like this. And so the question is he an outlier enough for you to take him? And I think that is kind of what you're going to have to decide when you're in your values and where you're at. So like, he has the speed. He has burst and lateral agility, man. Like, and he has good lateral agility in traffic. He's actually not bad at the line of scrimmage. You'll see him make guys miss, and you'll see him kind of get to the next level sometimes. I think he has really good vision in the open field, and even at the line of scrimmage. Like, he's got good vision at any place that he's at on the field. So like, from a pure running standpoint, he's one of the best pure runners in the class. Like, you have to give him that. And the one thing that he did this last year is he got over the Isaiah Spiller hump, because Isaiah wasn't there. And he took the load. He had the most carries he ever had. He had 1,100 yards. He had those 8 touchdowns. But then again, he got hurt this year. So he had all those carries, and then he got injured. And I think that is like, Okay, then he came back though. I will tell you this: he came back his last game, and he didn't need to come back because A&M was awful this year. But he said, "No, I'm going to come back," and he led them, and he had one of his best games of the year after coming back from an injury. So he's got the intangibles, he's got the heart, he's got the vision, he's got the size, or not size, he's got the speed. He just doesn't have the size. And I think, to me, and some people will say it's a cop out, but a guy like him, if you're drafting prior to the NFL draft, I wouldn't take him because it's too much of a risk. Like Anthony Richardson's the same way. Like if these guys that have too high of risk where you're like, they can really bottom me out and they're too high for me in my rookie drafts. If you draft before the NFL draft, I would just move on and get a safer floor guy. But if you're going to be normal and draft after the NFL draft, what I would do is I'm sitting and I'm waiting and I'm see if he gets, so there's some buzz about him getting second round draft capital. If Achane gets second round draft capital, then you should feel comfortable drafting him. Like that's how I would look at it. Or third round, like maybe fourth, depending on the landscape and depending on the value. But if he gets that second, third round, you're like, okay, so maybe the NFL is looking at him as being a weapon. And that's kind of how I look at those situations in terms of me. So like, and I try to do my analysis based on that. Okay, so if you're going to draft pre NFL draft, I limit the risk. If you're going to draft post NFL draft, okay, then let's see what the NFL thinks about these guys. Now, if you believe in Achane and you think, hey, this is my outlier guy, I don't mind risk though. Like if you're going to do that, I am all aboard. But I think his skill set, look for a team. So if you're waiting to see where he gets drafted, look for a team that does a wide zone scheme, something out there that it gives him that vision and his ability to kind of slip into the cracks and do those type of things. And one cut. So look for that. So look for those things out in space in a horizontally based offense that allows their backs to catch passes. Okay, something like that, not just dump offs, pass catching, those type of things. That's what I'm looking for at the NFL draft level, if he can do that. But again, the size is a legit concern.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of you saying he's one of the most complete backs. He's a really good natural runner. And I think the way he was played and utilized this last year, you saw a whole range, whether it be, inside zone duo type runs or get him out in space. He was utilized in all those different ways. I just don't know if the NFL is going to be able to say, right, here's 4 or 5 carries between the tackles. And I know that that's a very simplified way to view it, but I just don't know if they're going to trust his body type to be able to hold up. And yeah, we've seen some incredible fantasy seasons from guys like, whether it be, going back Duke Johnson or James White or players like that, where they've been fantastic as third down backs who get the occasional carry. But I don't know if that's enough that I want to be spending high draft capital in a rookie draft to go and get that type of guy, because the chances of them succeeding is pretty small. So yeah, I think he is probably the player maybe in this entire draft class that's more landing spot and draft capital dependent than anyone else, because you look at someone like Kenny Nwangu, who got some hype when he was a third round pick, but actually he was a third round pick because they basically viewed him as a special teamer. And I worry that he's not a natural special teamer, but as soon as you're running 4-2s, they like running backs in that kind of kick return game. Could he be we're going to take him in the the third round to basically be a kick returner, a kind of change of pace back? And I just worry that he's never going to be more than that. I'd love it if he was, and I think that if he gets that round 2 draft capital, that would hint more towards that for me, and I think I'd probably be more comfortable biting the bullet. But yeah, I just worry that, I know size isn't everything, and I try not to buy into size being everything, whether it be wide receivers, but at the running back position, I'm a little bit more concerned that, what do we think he's going to be? 180, maybe 190 at the next, when he weighs in at the combine. I'm just a little bit concerned.
I would love if he got to 195, I would be like, oh, awesome. But I don't like, it is not easy. Like I laugh all the time. Like it's easier for me to gain weight, but some of these guys' frames, the way they are, and like the elite level athlete, they can't put on that much weight. Like they just can't do it. And it's not really, it's not something that we should expect from a lot of these guys. Like, what would you think? So I know this is your show, but I just wanted to ask, like, so he got mocked to the Broncos. How would you feel at a Broncos landing spot? Because Javonte's injured. And
yeah,
so,
I mean, I'd like that as a from an NFL perspective, because I think that would be a really nice 1-2 punch him. But I'd be really concerned from a fantasy perspective because I think they'd basically eat into each other, and it would probably be that neither of them are anything more than kind of RB2s. But I think it would be fascinating to see if he can weigh in at 195 and still run a 4.2, then I'm probably going to be all in. But I think that I don't know if he can get that weight and maintain that speed.
That's the big thing. And if he came out and he said he's going for that 4.2, I have a hard time thinking that means he's going to be 195. That means he's probably going to be 185 or whatever he's going to weigh in at, and he's just going to go for it and say, "Hey, speed is the way it's going to get me in." And that's a good point you brought up. I didn't even really think about that. Like, he might get drafted a little higher and be that third round guy, but maybe the third round guy like Nwangu, like those guys, and you're like, wait. He did get day 2, but that day 2 maybe is baked into like special teams, and that's going to hurt you a little bit. So yeah, that's a good point too in terms of where he's at. But again, he's gotten mocked like second round multiple times that I've seen. Now, those are all come with a caveat. These guys are riders; they might not know necessarily where their guys are going. But I think from a pure speed, you can't like if you take a risk on him. I get it. Speed. His abilities, like I understand, like he's the second most riskiest pick probably in these. Well, maybe third. Boutte is probably second. First is Richardson. But if like you're looking at a chain based on skill and everything like there, like I don't mind missing on a guy like him if you have those extra seconds maybe or something that you can kind of use and maneuver around.
Josh Downs, uber productive athlete out of North Carolina, 5'10", 180 pounds, 4-star recruit. Stop me if you heard this before. Slightly undersized, potentially questions about whether he's going to be able to play on the outside. Is he going to be profiled as a pure slot receiver at the next level? Looking at him through his college career, we take a look at the tape. He was somebody that produced for fun at North Carolina, whether that be with the new quarterback this year, whether it be with Sam Howell previously last year. The thing with him that I keep coming back to is that he produces more than his size. Yes, he's 5'10". Yes, he's 180 pounds. But this is a guy that had 72% success rate on contested catches last year. He's a good route runner. I think that he's got the separation package that he could potentially play outside at the next level. But I do think that he probably profiles more as that slot receiver. He can get down the field. In his freshman year, he had an ADOT almost at 14. He can stretch the field. He's not elite in terms of high-end speed. He's more quicker than fast, if that makes sense, but he can still get there. I really like him. I think that he's probably a guy that's going to get lost in the shuffle in terms of rookie wide receivers. I think he's probably going to be in that third tier, and a lot of people are going to, just going to basically be one of the other guys. So for me, I really like him. I don't think he has the highest ceiling, but he's definitely not got the lowest floor. I think he is a player that's going to be productive, that can put up numbers in the NFL as a reliable receiver. You can see on film here, there's another touchdown pass, able to create separation, all three phases of the route. He's not just a guy that has to win early. He can win late. He can get downfield. I really like him, and I think that he's a player that's probably going to do more for your fantasy roster than several other late first-round picks, and I think that you can go out and grab him right now. Michael Mayer, absolute stud. People are talking about him as purely a blocking tight end. I think this is a guy that ticks every single box you want from a tight end at the next level. 5-star recruit out of high school, prototypical size, 6'4", 250 pounds. He's a player that improved every single year he was on campus in college. He arrived in his rookie year. He saw 18.3% targets per route run rate. That is outrageous. There's not many players that see that in their junior, senior seasons. This is a guy that saw it as a freshman. He can line up in line, set outside, whether it be in the slot or out wide. I think that he's going to walk in, and we talk about tight ends taking time to adjust, getting used to the game. I truly believe that he's a player that can be a quarterback's best friend from the second he walks into the NFL locker room. Yes, he's not Kyle Pitts athleticism. He's not a complete difference maker, matchup nightmare. But I really, truly believe that he is a player that is going to walk in and be probably a top 10 dynasty tight end. I think that he is a savvy route runner. He's not somebody that gets separation through being a better athlete, but he knows how to find those soft spots of the zones. He knows how to set up a defender and use angles to create separation. And I think that that's the sort of thing that translates really well to the next level. Natural hands catcher. I've come this far. I've not mentioned he is an elite level blocker. There is no doubt that he's going to come in and be able to block, anything on the backside of runs. I think that he could potentially be utilized maybe at the point of attacking some of those double teams. That's going to help him stay on the field. I think that if you are looking for a prototypical wide tight end that can line up in line, can flex out wide, can do everything you want and not leave the field, Michael Mayer's your man. Yes, he's not a sexy athlete. Yes, he's probably not going to get you really excited. But I think that he's going to come in and be a plug and play, reliable tight end. Probably never going to be a top 3, top 4 tight end in terms of fantasy production. But I think I wouldn't be shocked if he was a 6, 7, 8 year top 12 tight end for your fantasy team. So yeah, may not be a guy that you want to spend a first round pick on, but once you start to get to that later first round, early second round, even higher in those tight end premium leagues, I'm really excited about what he can be at the next level because I think he ticks every single one of your boxes. Zach Charbonnet, 4-star recruit out of high school from UCLA via Michigan, 4-year college career, 3 years seriously productive. 6'1", 220 pounds, prototypical size. I'll be honest, the more I watch him, the more I fall in love. I think he ticks a lot of boxes. I don't see any massive glaring holes in the game. I think he can do a lot for you and for the NFL and for your fantasy team. Let's take a look. He produced as a freshman in Michigan, 149 carries, 726 yards. He averaged almost 5 yards per attempt. But the other thing, he also got involved in the receiving game. 14 targets, almost a 10% target per route run rate. This is a guy that's got the potential to be a true 3-down back. He then had a challenging sophomore year, transferred to UCLA and absolutely blew up. We saw him get involved more and more, heavier workloads, almost 200 carries each year. But more importantly, he was getting involved in the receiving game. I think he's a good, well-built, all-round back. He's got, without doubt, the best vision of any back in this class. It is next level. You see the way that he can read, as you've just seen on the film there, gap closes, able to sidestep, step into that open hole and create a running lane. He's also very adept at that cutback lane. We'll see it time and time again in the NFL. That's the hardest read for running back to make. He does it every single time. Not the most agile in the open field. He's okay in terms of contact balance, ability to break basically uncommitted tackles. He lacks kind of elite juice. I think he's got decent top end speed, but it takes him a little while to get there. I worry a little bit about that. I think that his receiving work is reliable. I don't think he's an elite route runner. I don't think he's one of these guys that's going to be able to flex out wide and line out as a wide receiver that could potentially help you. But he's definitely going to be good enough to be utilized in the receiving game. He can be used in the screen game, whether it be check downs or what. He will get receiving work. I think he's a guy that is probably never going to be an elite fantasy option, but he's probably an NFL back that's going to have a decent career. Feels very safe. I really like him. The more I watch him, the more I fall in love. I think that he runs with impressive commitment, and I really think that he could be a 3-down back at the next level. So yeah, Zach Charbonnet, a guy that I'm falling in love with and has the potential to sneak into the back end of the first round. Sean Tucker, fast. This is a guy that is absolutely blazing fast wherever he touches the ball. He can take any carry to the house. High school 100-meter champion, high school 200-meter champion. He is so explosive. 3-star recruit at high school, 5'10", 210 pounds, ticks the size box, put up some really impressive stats. This is a guy that as a sophomore rushed for almost 1,500 yards, went over 1,000 yards this last season. He's also got work in the receiving game. The yardage totals aren't great, the touchdown totals, but this last year he saw 52 targets. That shows to me that they trust him, they relied on him. In terms of what we like to see, I think that the receiving work perhaps leaves a little bit of exaggeration in terms of the route running ability. I think he's competent. He's not elite. He's not a player that's going to get flexed out wide. He also isn't a natural hands catcher. He cradles the ball quite a lot. I don't think he's necessarily a player that you can rely on going up and getting the ball. He's a player that we're probably going to see more utilized in checkdowns and the screen game, almost a bit like a very different type of player. But in the receiving game, I see him a bit like Derrick Henry in terms of you can't rely on him as a elite receiving back, but you want to get the ball in his hands in space so he can go to work for different reasons, because he is lightning fast. I think that in terms of running the ball, I have real questions about his vision. He doesn't set up defenders. He doesn't set up rushing lanes. He misses cutback when there are opportunities to. I think that there's a little bit left to be desired in terms of that, but hopefully we can address that in the next level. Hopefully he can get with a good coaching staff that will help work that around. Overall, I am concerned about Tucker. I think there's a lot to like, and I think that if he gets a good coaching scheme and a good offense, I think he could be incredible. You put him in a Shanahan-style system where he can utilize that one cut and go and the high-end top speed, I think he could be incredible. But my concern is that the receiving work's okay, not elite. His pass protection is woeful. Like, I don't even really grade pass protection in terms of backs normally, but his pass protection is so bad it really screams on the film. So I worry that a 2-down speed back that's not great in the passing game, he could be difficult to rely on for fantasy purposes. There is definitely a ceiling there. There is definitely the potential that he could be a superstar, as I said, if he gets in the right scheme, if he rounds out some of those elements of his game. He's got that speed, that agility that you could completely take off. But it's going to be a wait and see with him. And, as a flyer at the back end of the first, early second rounds, he could be someone that I'm left with egg on my face this time next year, because he could easily outproduce what I'm saying he could. But he's probably a guy that I'm going to have a few shares of, but I'm not going to be overdrafting. I think there's going to be someone in almost every league that falls in love with him and sees the elite potential, particularly when he puts up decent numbers at the combine. To describe this guy as a one-trick pony might be a little bit harsh, but when your one trick is as good as Jalin Hyatt's one trick has been this year, it's hard not to love it. The Biletnikoff Award winner this last year, 4-star recruit at high school, 6 foot, 175 pounds. Man, he's had some year in terms of what he's put up, partnered with Hendon Hooker, and it's just blown up. So he had 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, almost averaged 19 yards per reception. When he caught the ball, it was moving those chains. I guess the thing you've always got to talk about with Hyatt is that speed. He had the ability and consistently got behind defenses at the next level. Is that going to translate? It's difficult to say. He is NFL fast, not just college fast, but there's certainly corners that aren't just going to be able to let him run past everybody like he has done this last year. I think there's some questions about potentially his route running. He does some nice kind of foot speed work in and out of the cuts. He has a nice hesitation move to set up defenders, but it's not great. There's no stacking of DBs. There's no ability to, angle insides before you're breaking out. It is a little bit simplistic in terms of his route run ability, but I might be being harsh on him. That could just be what he's being asked to do at the next level. I think he's got impressive speed and quickness, but he's also never looked great after the catch. Could be that he is a little bit skinny. He is a little bit of that kind of lighter framed receiver, but he was not utilized perhaps as much as you'd expect in that kind of more complex underneath. It was pretty much either get the ball in his hands or he's burning deep. And that was basically how he was utilized this last year. I think that he will likely translate to the next level, but I am seriously concerned that we're talking about the potential ceiling of his fantasy career being like a Torrey Smith, who had a couple of decent years as a startable fantasy option, but was never going to be a star. And I think I've seen Jalin Hyatt going potentially in the first round in some mock drafts, and I think that for fantasy purposes, that's probably a little bit too rich for a guy that's got the boom bust potential that he has. If you're someone that wants to shoot for the moon, that wants to go for that high upside, then absolutely he's the kind of guy that you can jump on board with. But I just don't know if he's going to translate as well to next level. I think he could be pigeonholed in the slot where he get those free releases, because I do think that given his size, given the way that he likes to play and that ability to get deep, I do think that there's potential that he may struggle to get released if he's seeing that press man coverage. So yeah, lots of potential, lots of high upside, but I do worry that a one-trick pony might not translate to the next level.